I'm happy to use. Your mic on, your speakers on. You try and unmute it. I don't know. This is what. Drop it. So like Zoom has its own volume. Yes. Okay, which can drive you crazy. Okay, so we're good. We can get going. You want to do a quick intro or you want me to?
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those of you I maybe haven't met, my name is Jen Graham. I'm the chair of the Medford Conference High School Building Committee. I'm the vice chair of the school committee, and I'm a parent of 2 students currently in this building. Tonight, we're going to do a couple of things. We have a presentation that'll really talk about what the options are that are before us. And we'll cover a little bit about the timeline of the decision making, which is coming shortly, and what that means. And then take some Q&A, because I think people have a lot of questions and people don't all care about the same things at the same time, right? So whatever your questions are, we want to be able to answer them if we can. And so we'll take questions both from folks on Zoom as well as from folks here in the room. And then we will, once we're done with all of that, go out into the foyer. We have some boards and models, and just more time for folks to like grab the project team individually, chit chat, touch and feel these things, and also go tell us what you like. So the big headline is that on June 10th, we're going to go from the set of options you'll see tonight to a single option. And what does that mean? That just means we have picked a design, roughly a place on the site, roughly a shape. And we will now pour our focus into all that it entails to make that sort of concept a reality, including things like where are classrooms as opposed to the library, where are vocational programs, where does the gym go? All of those things can't happen until we get to 1. The other things that will happen once we get to 1 is the building committee will continue talking about cost. Obviously, cost is a big question. It's a huge concern. This is a big project. Schools cost a lot of money. I don't fully understand why. They just do. And they cost more every single day. So every day that we wait is another day where we're escalating costs. So I take that really seriously, and I want to make sure that we're being quickly and comprehensively so that we can go to school and students can use a new school as soon as humanly possible on our part. So I'm going to turn it over to the project team to talk a little bit about the options. But at any time, feel free to reach out to me or the MHS project email and ask for questions if you have answers tonight. And then bear with us as we respond. It's a super busy time of year, and we'll try to be thoughtful in our responses. So sometimes there's things. So I'm gonna turn it over to Matt Rice, who's our lead architect, from SMA, and he's gonna take you through the choices. Thanks.
We're gonna get the PowerPoint working. Here. Advancing there. There we go. So Jenny, was nice enough to introduce me already. I'm gonna have the rest of our team introduce themselves as well, though, just to start here.
Yes, I'm Jen Carlson. I'm with Left Field. Left Field is the owner's project manager for the project.
I'm Laura Swan, I'm civil engineer with SMA.
All right, and so we went through the agenda a little bit already, but just so you can see it here, we can go through it again. We're gonna talk a little bit about the timeline of what's upcoming. We're gonna tell you just big picture what some of the design updates have been since the last time that we were together for a community forum, because there's been a couple of updates. Then we're gonna just pull back and take a look at the 6 options that are currently under consideration. And some of those design updates have actually impacted those 6 alternatives that we have. There's some different information to look at and talk through. So we'll give you that sort of even brush approach to all 6 options so you can understand each one. And then we're just gonna roll right into Q&A here in the room. And once we sort of exhausted the group questions, we'll head out into the lobby. And as Jenny said, we'll be looking at boards, models, the design team, and the OPM team will be available for some discussion as well. Also, just want to point out specifically in terms of engagement opportunities. So if you've been coming to some of these community meetings before, you'll know that we have our colored dots that we'll hand out so that people can actually indicate a preference for your preferred alternative out on the boards when we're out there. So that's one option for providing feedback. We also have some voice and vision postcards, which we've done in the past. We've updated those cards so that you can tell us maybe what your preferred alternative is and also give us a little bit of the rationale as to why, right? It's both the choice and then the reasoning behind it. We have, in addition to the physical cards for those that are here, because we know it's a busy time and people are all over the place, there's a digital version of that as well. So if you prefer to use the digital feedback method, that's fine. There'll be a QR code that's on the PowerPoint that we have out here. I think we may have, Will, some hard copies as well floating around. That table over there in different languages as well. So you can scan the QR code from those or from the PowerPoint, and I'll leave that slide up maybe when we're going through Q&A, just so people can make sure that they get that engagement opportunity. All right, so I'll turn it over to Jen for the timeline.
I feel like I'm too close to the owl.
Yeah.
So just taking everyone through the timeline, to kind of frame this, the Medford is partnering with the MSBA for funding, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. As part of that partnership, we do have some deadlines and some deliverables to make sure that we are checking in with the MSBA every so often. Part of our next submission is coming up later this month. I believe it's June. So leading up to that, we have on June 10th, the SBC is meeting to select a single preferred option, which is why tonight's feedback is very important ahead of that meeting. So we really do look to hear what everyone has to say tonight and online through the engagement opportunities. Following that meeting on the 10th to select a single option, there will be a meeting on June 18th with the school building committee to approve the submission that is going to the MSBA. That submission is called the Preferred Schematic Report, PSR. Then the team will be submitting that to the MSBA no later than June 25th. That is the deadline. From there, we submit to the MSBA. They then start to review, and we will get some feedback from the MSBA on that submission and on the option chosen in July. Following that, there is an MSBA Board of Directors meeting at the end of August 26th. That is where the MSBA Board of Directors officially approves the project to move forward into schematic design. And during schematic design, this is that blue section there. It runs the end of August through to February. February is when the final feasibility study submission goes into the MSBA. So the schematic design submission submitted in late February. That is where the project scope and budget is set to move forward. So we have from now until February 2027 to really hone in on those costs. As Jenny mentioned, it's a concern, and the SBC is working every angle to make it affordable for the city. So we submit SD in February 2027. From there, there's another MSBA Board of Directors approval in April, end of April 2027. And that will approve the project scope and budget, and we will know at that point what the MSBA's grant is officially on this project and what their participation will be versus the district share. Moving from there, in May of 2027, that is when we are targeting the local approvals for the project. Once the project is approved locally through a vote, we move into design development, and from there, I think depends on what option is selected on timeline of when a school would open. So that's enough information probably on schedule that doesn't get you to that project for now, and we'll hand it back to Matt to talk more about the exciting.
I think it's all exciting. The schedule is exciting. Deed restriction is exciting as well. So we did talk at the last community meeting about the deed restriction. This was the agreement back in 1967 between TCR and the city of Bedford. When the existing high school building was built, there's a section of Edgerly Field as well as the football practice field that have a deed restriction on it saying that the only things that can be developed there are either for recreational uses or for access roads to feed those recreational uses. So that was something that came to light. And essentially, we've been working since our last community meeting pretty intensely to try to find the path forward through that. We've had a building committee meeting since then as well, where we really outlined the path forward. So visually, just so everyone can understand, and the yellow-green shading are the areas of the site that have the deed restriction on them right now. So the three alternatives that you see here, so the 8.1, which is the code upgrade option, the B1.2 addition renovation option, the one that keeps the majority of the existing building, and the D1.1 option, which is new construction primarily on the southern parking lot, but a little on the existing building. All of those were free and clear of any of the deed restriction areas, so we can proceed with considering those as we initially had. Alternative C2.2, 3.4, and D2.1 all had some amount of their building massing overlapping on that deed restricted area. And so what we have done moving forward and what the building committee voted to approve and move us forward with was revising C2.2 and 3.4 to avoid the deed restricted area, keeping the spirit and the design intent of each of those, but shifting around the volumes that you'll see in a moment. And then D2.1, there was no way to conceive of that particular option outside the deed restriction because that option was building on Edgerly Field, and because the majority of Edgerly Field had the deed restriction, it sort of negated it. So that was voted on at the last, or maybe two building committee meetings ago. There was a decision to move forward with C2.2A that you'll see, and then C3.4A, which are the evolutions of those two, and to remove D2.1 from consideration. I think it just takes a little while to come up. Nope, it didn't. So this is just a quick explanation. We have one of these slides for C2.2A and C3.4A, but it shows you where we were previously in terms of the option, in terms of how it was massing. This red line that you see through here is the deed restriction line. So these wings were the pieces of the building that were beyond it. And then to the right-hand side, you can see the new revised C2.2A option as it's been moving forward. So this is a massing depiction of the particular option. We will have floor plans as well that will show you. So this has been thought out at the same exact level as all of the other options that were under consideration. There's a three-dimensional view here as well, showing that progression from an aerial overhead view from C 2.2 to C 2.2A. Similarly, C 3.4 evolving to C 3.4A. Again, you can see the deed restriction line that's coming through, and you can see how the intent of the building and sort of the idea, the genesis behind the massing remains intact. Both of these options preserve the existing gymnasium as well as the existing pool, and renovate those and build around them in different ways. And so you can see again in the three-dimensional view how we're evolving the massing going forward, and we'll get into some more detail there. So that was the deed restriction input into our design process. The other input into the design process we've had is actually from the MSBA. So in the feasibility study hierarchy, we complete the preliminary design report, which is a PDP phase report. We submitted that to the MSBA. They reviewed it. They got back to us with some comments. One of their comments was that they wanted to see a high school only option developed for the particular for one particular design. They didn't say that we need to do it for all the designs. They just wanted to have it run out as an example to understand what are the cost implications to not doing anything in this building besides high school grade 9 to 12 program elements. There's a lot of other things that are here at the high school. There are some things that were being considered to be brought here, but as sort of an evaluation point, the MSBA asked us to do this. We did have some conversations with them as to why were they asking for this particular topic? And I think Jenny explained it at the building committee meeting we had on Monday of this week, that it wasn't that they were telling Medford that we cannot have any of these other non-high school programs in the building. What they want to do is just make sure it's absolutely clear as to the cost of those non-high school related programs. So by taking all of them out, we're going to look at the costs, but we're also drawing floor plans. We're looking at massing so we can see what all the various implications are of pulling those pieces out of the building. So that we've actually added that in as another alternative for consideration. So we started at 6 because the deed restriction came down to 5. And then we're adding in this high school only version of C 2.2A. That's just the one that we chose to sort of implement it on. In theory, that high school only concept could be applied to any of the different alternatives aside from 8.1, because the code upgrade option is just limited in terms of programs of what's here and replicating it. All right, so that's how we got to where we are today. I'm now just going to run through the 6 different options just so you can sort of see on a level playing field where they are. And then I'm happy to take some questions afterwards. I saw a question back there, but I think if I can run through some of this I may answer some questions. I think it's good to just have sort of the full suite of information before we dive in. So graphically, just comparatively to all 6 alternatives that are currently under consideration are shown here. So again, code upgrade, our addition renovation that preserves the majority of the building, builds vertically from it and replaces the A wing. C 2.2A now, and C 2.2A high school only, keeping the gymnasium, renovating the pool. What's depicted also in C 2.2A is the renovation of the fitness center, the gymnastics gym, and some of those high bay spaces that are larger from an alternative PE perspective. That is shown here. I wouldn't say that's necessarily off the table right now for C 3.4A, but it's not shown graphically. If you're wondering why, the dark blue is slightly different here than in that particular option. And then lastly, we have D 1.1, which is our all new construction option that's still preserved. The costs for these were also presented at some recent building committee meetings. What's outlined here is the variety of costs for, this is another 6 options. It's slightly different in terms of what's running across the top, and I'll try to explain why that is. There are familiar numbers as you go across the top, though, in terms of 8.1, the code upgrade option, D1.2, C 2.2A, 3.4A, D.1, and then there's a D.1 NP at the end. The NP stands for no pool. This was another request of the MSBA as we were going through, and just in terms of creating a cost model for it, because under new construction, a new pool has to be a completely separate project. We have to vote on that project separately from the high school project that was actually just reconfirmed for us earlier today by the MSBA. So that is there for consideration. It's not a different version of D 1.1. It just means that we would not be building that new construction pool alongside of it. Going down these rows, however, we have the various combinations of programs that you might find in the building, right? So when I said that the high school only concept could be applied to any of the different options, aside from 8.1, this is what I was talking about. So that top line is just high school programs for any of the options that are under consideration. And this C.2A is the high school option. That's the cost that we would be looking at for that as we go forward, and you'll see that number again. This first line is the high school program, as well as the existing non-high school programs that are currently located here in the building right now today. So that includes the things like the district office, the welcome center, Medford Family Network, Kids Corner. Like there's a long list, and I'm going to forget one if I try to catch all of them. But everything that's in the building today. The last number is sort of the all-in number that takes both, provide space for the programs that are here today, as well as some of the programs that are being considered to be brought here to the high school. So that includes the preschool, the MEET program to create the early education center alongside Medford Family Network and Kids Corner. It includes, this is where I'm going to lose myself in terms of the various list. The Curtis Tufts being brought here as well, the district's therapeutic day program. So all the programs that are being thought to come in, as well as the existing programs that are here besides the high school. By the way, that's that bottom line number, and that's why there's an increase from top to bottom in terms of numbers that we're looking at. One general note down here at the bottom is the fact that these estimates do not include any of the non-program related cost alternates. And so some of those are like the photovoltaics, some of the options that we have for HVAC systems, these types of things. Those alternates will be reviewed by the advisory teams as we go into the fall and sort of reviewed at sort of a more detailed level, and then recommendations brought back to the full building committee by the advisory teams as part of a review process. So we just want to let everyone know sort of what these numbers include and what they do not include. And then quickly, as I start to jump into the different alternatives, the numbers that you see highlighted here are the 6 options that you're going to see in terms of the different costs. So that's how they're pulled out of this table and applied into the primary options that are under consideration right now. All right, so code upgrade option. I know there's a lot of folks that have seen this before the presentation, so I won't take too long because I may also see some new faces. I want to make sure that we're clear with this. The code upgrade option is a renovation and basically fixing this existing building for all of the code compliance issues, and that can be mechanical code, it can be accessibility code. The most expensive one is structurally from a seismic code standpoint. So we have to fix all those things. So if we're touching like the light fixtures will all need to be replaced, the air system, a lot of the finishes have to come down. So we're doing almost a gut renovation on this existing building to fix everything that's here and just bring it up to code. It is intended to be a benchmark by the MSBA. So what that means is that it's an understanding of how much the city would have to spend to be able to bring this, basically fix the building, right? And that is in comparison to the other new options and the addition renovation options that we're going to be looking at. So an interesting requirement of the code upgrade option is if the code upgrade option does not meet the educational plan, it means that none of these renovations would be reimbursable through the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, right? So that the entire $529 million now is on the city of Medford to pay for. When we look at some of the other options that do meet the educational plan, there is a reimbursement that will be coming back to the city. That is why we're in the MSBA program for that reimbursement. The reason that the existing building does not meet the educational plan, there's like an enormous laundry list of why. I think the biggest one is that primarily if you look at the CTE programs, the spaces that we have here now are not sized large enough to be able to accommodate per state regulations the enrollment of students that they have in there. They're all too small. In terms of the shop spaces that we're looking at. There's science labs that are slightly too small to meet state regulations. Even the classroom sizes with the number of students that are going in are not generally meeting the size. So beyond just sizing, there's curriculum issues that are tied to the physical facility that are at odds as well. So the existing code upgrade option will not meet the educational plan, and therefore it will not be reimbursable at all from the state. So we don't have too much information on the code upgrade option. We tend to try to not, I know there's been a request previously to show those existing plans. We try not to show existing school plans in public meetings just from a safety perspective. But we did want to give a sense of how this is phased so that people can understand when we're looking at the amount of time it takes for these options, how do we work through renovating, because we do need to study it. So the first year, so starting potentially next summer, we may be doing some early work on the site to enable construction of the project. That may include some things like drilling geothermal wells. It may include putting in some utilities. If there are temporary modulars, we'll work on those. The next year, so summer 2028 is when construction would begin in earnest. And we would start towards the northern end of the building. So that includes renovation of the gymnasium, the pool, as well as the C wing. We're starting up here because the central mechanical room for the building is right up there. So we need to replace that and then basically work our way and feed that into the rest of the building as we move to the south. The second phase would involve the vocational wings, and then the third phase would involve the central B wing as well as the auditorium, the A wing. Where we see this M number in here, these are modular classrooms that would have to be brought to the site and used here as temporary instructional environments during the course of those phases. There are 56 of them, primarily because when we take down the C wing or we take down the B wing, that's about how many classrooms we have to replicate for either of those phases. So that's where that number comes from. And so you can understand sort of how we move from the existing building to a fully renovated version of this building, basically fixing what's here today. Alternative B1.2, there's a lot of similarities in terms of trying to stick on the existing footprint. There is an addition that we're going to be doing vertically, but with this particular option, we will meet the ED plan because we are allowed in this scenario to basically reconfigure the entirety of the interior of the building to address the size of spaces, to address really the sense of community that's within the building. So this would feel like a new building, a new environment on the inside, but we'll be salvaging primarily the structure of this existing building. So there's a huge environmental benefit to salvaging the existing structure of the building. It's something that we've been referring to as embodied carbon. It's really this notion that back in 1970, when this building was built, there was a lot of carbon put into the atmosphere to bring all the materials to the site, to fabricate all the materials that were used in the concrete frame and the steel frame portion of this building. And so this option is, from that particular lens, the most sustainable. There's a lot of different sustainability lenses that we can look at a building through. In terms of modular classrooms, this option would require those as well, simply because we're not expanding beyond the footprint of the existing building. So when we touch the C wing or the B wing, we will immediately have that need to recreate those spaces. We also need to, as part of the 8.1 or B1.2 option, we need to find temporary space for the CTE programs that are in the vocational wing when we renovate those spaces, right? So it is easier to find like a programming web development temporary space than it is to find an auto technology or build an auto technology temporary space on the site. So for that, there may be students moving back and forth from the building to an offsite location, a community partner, members of the advisory teams, that type of thing. It's incredibly disruptive to students, to teachers, and to the educational experience. So that is a downside of renovating the existing building and having to find those temporary vocational spaces as well. We do have floor plans of the existing options. I'm not going to go through all the detail of these, because I have done it before. If people have questions, I am more than happy to circle back to them, because there is a lot of thought and time that's been put into like organizing these plans so that each one of them really would be a wonderful school environment at the end of the day. We don't want to show anything to the community, to anyone here, that we wouldn't be happy with in terms of a design product at the end of the day. So they all have been very much thought through in terms of programmatic adjacencies that we heard when we were meeting with the educators and trying to really understand what the building is about, but also trying to create a logical and sort of a connective set of spaces so that it really feels like a more connected community when high school students enter, and when all the other program elements that are at the high school are brought to this building or sort of reconfigured within the building. So again, 5 floors here with this existing building, with the 2 added stories going above the primarily 3-story building that we have today. An aerial image showing some of those programmatic relationships. Second aerial. I will point out, as we're looking at sort of both the building and then the rest of the site context, and I may like steal all of Laura's thunder and not let her get a word in edgewise, but definitely stop me if I'm missing something. I did want to point out that for all the options previously, we were showing a field located over a parking garage as like our primary concept. As we shifted from our initial preliminary feasibility study phase to this phase, we really shifted the thinking there so that our baseline assumption is all surface parking and surface fields. So no elevated field above a parking area. We do still have numbers for that. We have alternatives, and I'll show you the numbers in a minute for each one if we wanted to add that and basically add to the field inventory that each one of these site options gives us. But what you'll see right now, so for instance, B1.2, and also it was in 8.1, basically recreates the existing parking areas that are on site as the parking approach. They would be completely renovated. We would fix the accessibility issues, the drainage issues, everything that's there. But in terms of the footprint, it's going to look very much like it does today. And that means the field inventory will also look very much like it is today. Renovated versions of the football practice field, Edgerly fields, and the practice field adjacent to Edgerly fields. Do you want to talk about this one, Mark? I think it's great.
Does, oh, the site circulation?
Yeah.
Sure. So one of the main differences, is all the options will have 360-degree access around the building. We heard from so many people that circulation is kind of a nightmare at times. We heard from first responders that this is a concern of theirs. So there will be, different sort of roads and loops for buses, car drop off, and of course, emergency egress. It's a little more difficult to change the grade with the majority of the existing buildings staying as it is, but we found a way to make that connection happen on the other side of the school. And I will just also make a plug for the field over the parking option too, that this would basically give a whole other field on site. And all the parking would be less visible and underneath. It does add to cost.
And just to note that that is total project cost. So that was part of the request from the building committee that when we show these costs, it's not just a construction cost, it's construction cost plus the soft costs that go on top of that. So it's been added on. So that's sort of an all-in number for the additional cost for the field over the garage in this particular option.
And I think in that option, it would be into the site of the hill, instead of,
Right. The garage ends up here. Yeah.
so it's like, built into the site.
All right. I won't take too much time on the phasing diagram for this, because the concept is exactly the same as the 8.1 option. Really, the only difference is in the durations of the phases, particularly when we're building new construction above existing buildings. It slows down the process as opposed to just renovating the inside of the building, because you can just start there and go through. We have to make sure that the rest of the building where students are learning and teachers are teaching adjacent to that construction area are safe. And so that priority on safety and sort of the nuance of having to build through. This is built on top of the steel frame portions of the building, which is more viable than trying to go on top of the concrete frame portion of the building. So it is still a best case scenario, but it is lengthy and the time is increased considerably from the 8.1 option because of that. All right, our C2.2A option. So this is, again, the revision to the C22 option based on the deed restriction response. The total height of this building is 6 stories. That first story is really just a portion of the lowest, most southern extreme wing of the building where the early education center would be located. So really the portion of the building that the high school students are experiencing is going to be primarily a 5-story building. But we just, to keep everything on a level playing field, there are 6 floors, so we're saying 6 stories. Just some items of note here. Again, the modular classrooms were removed from all the rest of the options in terms of consideration. We heard the feedback during the initial feasibility study phase that they were not desirable. And so we've essentially come up with phasing options that I'll show you in a minute that avoid the use of the modular classrooms. As we did additional study on the phasing approach, you'll see that the time frame for this overall did increase considerably as well. And that's really because of the fact that we have considerable pieces of the building that we're building square footages, areas of the building in each particular phase. So there's only a certain amount of time or a certain amount of building you can build in a certain amount of time. So we have to layer those phases, the different phases on top of each other. The C 2.2 option was a little bit shorter in terms of how it could actually be put together. And it was because it actually flared off in this direction. And because the building flared off in this direction, we could avoid building on top of the C wing and basically build the entirety, almost the entirety of the new addition in one phase. And so that greatly increased the amount of time by removing a phase. When the building swung back in this direction, we're now on top of the C wing. And there's just really no way to avoid that because of the deed restriction. And so the timing for this now looks a lot like the C 3.4 A option, which was previously they were almost I don't know, maybe a year or two apart in terms of the duration of construction.
Yeah, I'm just asking a question.
Sure.
With the duration though, that doesn't mean that it's gonna take 80 months for the students to
No.
walk in the building,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Will. So and the question for those, if people can't hear online, is when we say 80 months, it does not mean that we're waiting 80 months and then we move into a new building. The reality of the phase project is that we're going to get access to that first phase sooner. And so it's in this particular instance, and you'll see in the phasing diagrams, it is the renovated pool, the gym, and these northern section of the new addition, which includes both CTE spaces as well as general academic spaces. So that will come online within a year or two, depending on how quickly we can build it. And also when we're talking about 80 months, we are including in that first year of site enabling work, which is between 2027 and 2028 summers, when we're going to be on site just drilling geothermal wells, potentially that type of thing. It also includes a year at the conclusion to finish the site work. So after the building is complete. So you can take 24 months off total, 12 months on either end when we're thinking about the duration. And then, yes, we do get into those the earlier phase completion building portions sooner than that time frame. So it's a good nuance of that particular number when we're talking about it. So again, the question, I'll keep doing this, just repeating the questions, so folks online can hear. But whether or not there is an idea of how long Edgerly Field will be offline for any of the particular options. And I will say, we don't know that 100% yet. I will say it's likely that it will come off the line potentially pretty early in the process to be able to drill geothermal wells. It's sort of a high value area for that. We have to confirm with land council that is a viable thing to put below the deed restriction in terms of geothermal wells. But Edgerly Field, whether it's used for that, whether it's used for temporary parking, whether it's used for construction, laydown space logistically, it is one of the rare open spaces on the site. And so it will likely be consumed for one of those purposes. When it comes back online, I don't think we know 100% yet. When we have a construction manager on board, we'll be able to have a little bit more of an informed conversation on that to understand specifically when we can get access to it. But I know there's already planning underway to understand what alternative resources can get used either in Medford or within neighboring communities to help make up for the loss of that particular field. All right. Okay. All right, floor plans of C 2.2A. Again, I'll just point out that first floor that I was talking about is just that small piece on the first floor for the early education center. Has a separate entry from the high school, so that we're not commingling where little students are entering the building, where high school students are entering the building. We move up. Again, the third floor here is sort of the primary continuous floor all the way through the high school building, and will sort of feel like a completely high school environment. And then we have the fourth floor, fifth floor, and sixth floor above this. The aerial view, in terms of the site components that are here surrounding the building, we are able to fit in both a running track as well as a football field up at the top where Edgerly Field rests right now. Whether or not we can have bleachers that are above and beyond what are out there right now for the soccer fields and the lacrosse fields is something that we're going to again have to discuss with the land council to understand what the deed restriction will allow for. But there is the ability to fit that type of resource, on the site here, where Edgerly is right now. This would also include the renovation of the football practice field to, I mean, it can eventually not be football practice at that point if we have a full football field. And then one multi-purpose field as well down towards the southern end of the site, more or less on top of the existing parking lot now.
I would give it, the athletic field is kind of a very last part. Or is,
Right, so the question is, intuitively, it seems like fields would be the last piece of a construction project going through. I think that's an accurate read in terms of how the site would get developed. Certainly, if it's a natural grass field, you want to have some ability for it to sit and rest, before it's used. We may have more flexibility with a synthetic turf field in terms of how quickly it can be used and against, what it can be used. But I think that those are all going to be considerations that are discussed with the construction manager, looking at the city's needs, the district's needs, all in conjunction to understand sort of what is viable and what's the preferred path forward. Again, same view from a different perspective. And again, the image to the right-hand side is our parking garage, with fields on top. In essence, what each one of these will do is add one additional, multi-purpose, soccer lacrosse field to the overall field inventory. It slides the parking underneath, and it raises that one field that was at grade, up into the raised, above parking elevation, if you want to think about it that way. And then as Laura mentioned, all these options are now showing 360-degree access for first responders, as well as to alleviate some of the challenges of traffic circulating around the site. I will say as well, this option is starting to explore an improvement to Steve Miller Drive, to both alleviate congestion in terms of traffic coming in and out, but also providing some amenities for first responders to better address and serve the site. It does not create a secondary emergency access anywhere, but what it's trying to do is really work with the land that we have, to create the best scenario possible as we move forward. The phasing for C 2.2A, this starts to get into what I was alluding to earlier. This first phase of the building, this is the one that could be open somewhere between a year and two after we get into that summer of 2028. Up through here, so renovation of the gym, the pool, new addition. The second phase is where it gets complicated because we actually have to tear down the C wing and a part of the A wing as well to be able to get that to work as it stretches down. The third phase really involves the removal of the existing building that remains, and then the site work is completed after the fact, the fields again that we're just talking about, parking, that type of thing. This is our C22A high school options. This is the high school only program, and so here you can actually see what the changes are in between C22A and what we were just, or what we're looking at now with the high school. And essentially what we've done is looked at truncating the piece of the mast that extends further south. This is where the early education center was located, and so that's one of the programs that would not be here. That's part of why it makes sense to sort of pull back in that direction. This would also lower that section of the building by a story in that area. And by doing those combination of things, we really get to the point of the square footage that comes out if we're looking at just a high school only option. So other than that, it looks and would function identically to the C22A option. Time frame still generally the same because we are still extending over the C wing. In the fields, same in terms of the inventory that we have here in the surface parking lot, the space condition. Floor plans look similar again. We can study later if anyone is interested what's at each level as we move up through. This is result in a 5-story building though, because we are getting rid of that southern portion. That's where that lowest level was. So even though the building itself is going to be relatively the same on the inside, technically it does change from a 6-story building to a 5-story building. This is a 3-dimensional view of it from the other direction. And then site circulation, which again is going to look very similar. Part of the reason why we also targeted this area is that we want to think about future expansion as well. we have to plan for the building from an MSBA perspective, but also if down the road, those programs that were removed or are moved from the high school want to come back, this will be a good location opportunity to fulfill and add that programmatic space on. Same concept in terms of the field over the garage space or over the parking area, same relative cost in terms of this high school only option. In the phasing, this is the same phasing. This is actually the C22A graphics that you see here, but you can imagine if we just take away that section towards the bottom, the phasing concept is going to be exactly the same. C3.4A, so this is our second edition renovation that focuses on saving the gym as well as the pool space. Very similar, I would say overall to C2.2A. Obviously the geometry is different. The way that we're wrapping around the entirety of the existing field house, slightly different. But in terms of what's yielded at the end of the day, because the building is in a similar spot, this is still having consideration for a track and field up on Edgerly Field, renovation of a practice field, as well as one relocated multi-purpose soccer and lacrosse type field. Duration, exactly the same as C2.2A, again, because of how C2.2A changed to sort of match and align with the phasing approach to this one. We have our floor plans moving up. This is a 5-story building in its initial configuration as it's represented here. 3-dimensional image of it. And then site circulation, again, very similar in terms of how it navigates. And the last time we looked at this, there was a question about whether or not there was this connecting circulation drive that runs through. It was something that was able to be realized in terms of a grading approach to get traffic to circulate through. And so this will provide a shortcut rather than everyone having to circulate around the entirety of the building and back down, which we understand was challenging. This allows for bus traffic, MBTA buses pulling in, drop off at the front of the high school, and then pull back out. So streamlines that approach to it. Our phasing concept here, similar, we're going to be building towards the northern end of the building. This also, just as we go all the way back to the code upgrade option, we want to replace the central heating plant and cooling plant for the building in that first phase, and that's partly why we're building here, but it means that the pool and the gym and then all these associated spaces are the first ones to come online. We then get to demolish the remainder of the building, build the second portion of the addition. And this is something I didn't explain earlier, but is it worth noting? The reason why we don't have any modular classrooms in this particular option is because everything that we would be demolishing in the second phase, we're going to be building space for up here. So we're essentially creating permanent modular buildings by creating that first phase of construction. And then lastly, we have our D1.1 new construction option, again, to the southern side of the site. We are showing the site configuration here with the surface parking lot adjacent to a multi-purpose field and then track and field up at the top. I think certainly if people were interested in not having a track and field up at Edgerly, we could still renovate the fields that are up there right now. So you could have 2 more multi-purpose fields and a practice field up there if that was preferable for whatever reason. That would increase your field inventory on site. This is sort of swapping it out for a different type of resource, but I think one that we've heard is desirable from the overall site perspective, having this type of resource here in terms of allowing athletes not have to cross the city to Vermel Stadium for that type of competitive environment. Our floor plans moving up through the building. This is currently at a 5-story building as well in terms of how it plays out. I will say that just generally, because on the first floor has a lot of the CTE programs that have access or desire to have direct connection to the exterior. Auto technology one is one that we can't put up in the air. Obviously, there's a lot of other programs that really want to have first floor access. But in terms of the primary high school environment, where the cafeteria is, where the gymnasium would be, it will be up on the 3rd floor. So students would be coming in and they'll essentially be moving up to that primary environment. Not too dissimilar from the C22A or the C34A options, just in terms of how the site works here. And then the 5th floor. 5th floor, 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 massing on the site, we talked about this before a little bit, but is responsive to, the Steve Miller Drive entry sequence coming in, so it feels like a welcoming environment. We do walk this line with this particular option of being very close to the front of the site. And so the building will be very present, it will be very visible off of Winthrop Street, versus moving back towards into the rest of the site. But we also want to make sure that this does not create a traffic bottleneck, right at the entry as we're coming in through, so we have to walk that line in terms of site circulation and building massing. Our other three-dimensional view.
That's my first question. Yeah, this,
Mhm.
if you place facility, parking lot, it will actually, like, it will go outside the roadway, and actually,
Yeah, so the question again is just regarding Edgerly Field in this particular option, whether there's any higher potential for Edgerly Field to come offline immediately. And then the other field so that it could be used for parking potentially, given the fact that we'll be building on top of the parking lot in the first phase with this particular option. I will say it's definitely a possibility. I don't know if it's any higher possibility or probability than any of the others. I'm gonna just default back to that answer of saying we need to have those CM on board. And then we need to engage in a conversation with the district and the city to understand what are the priorities. Because we could determine that it's more important to have a field on site, and then we have to create parking off site and do some remote shuttling or something back and forth. We can change parking policies so that people can't drive it. There's a whole bunch of different options and levers that we can push, but we haven't had those conversations yet to know where the priorities are and where we would end up. And we really do want to have the construction manager on board before we start to dive into that, because we want their perspective. They're eventually going to be the ones that have to manage the timeline, the schedule, and the cost, and sort of work to whatever the expectations are and obligations that we lay out for them in terms of the site development, the fields.
and is the function manager liable after the season work? Or do they come?
Beforehand. So the question is, when is the construction manager anticipated to come on to the team? I think right now we're tracking towards October, maybe end of October, in terms of them coming on. The process will start earlier, but in terms of having someone actually on, as part of the team, October is the target. And that would give enough time prior to the vote to be able to work through some of those things. Right.
On that last slide?
I know I've opened the floodgate to questions, so I apologize.
Yeah, no, well, we got to it, but. Wait, real quick, sorry. So that new construction. You would assume that that new construction happens while this building is still in use. So then after some amount of time, that building comes online and then you start to, demo this.
That's correct. Yeah, so again, the question online for folks is, are we envisioning that the southern portion of the building is being built while the rest of the school is active? There's teaching and learning going on in here, and the answer to that question is yes. But it's also going to be yes to any of the other options that we're looking at. That's just a reality of making the decision that we're going to rebuild here on this particular site. Is that somehow we have to get to a new building, whether it's renovating what's here, whether we're building new portions of addition or new construction, while we're teaching and learning here. So it will make on-site circulation challenging in terms of how things are going to get modified. We may lose parking, we may lose fields as part of the process until we get all the way done. But that is also going to be a big part of the construction manager's responsibility to make sure that site circulation is done in a safe and responsible way so that no one is put in any sort of danger going through this. That is the paramount consideration when we're talking about building on an occupied site. All right, so I guess that was technically okay to ask questions because we're sort of at the end anyway. This is the QR code. Thank you, Suzanne. This is the QR code to scan if you prefer to do your feedback digitally versus the voice and vision cards that we have over there. We can hand those out once we wrap up in here and before we move out into the lobby. If people prefer to hand those into us hard copy, I think whether it's digital or whether it's hard copy, we are looking to get feedback by the end of the day this Friday, so that we have enough time to basically process and tabulate all that information and share back to the building committee so the building committee can understand sort of larger community perspective. So if you have neighbors, friends, relatives that are not able to be here tonight, they can use, this QR code. And this will be posted as well online, so you'll be able to get to it that way. They can fill out a voice and vision card and indicate their preferred option, so we can share it with the building committee moving forward. And then again, just we have boards, when we head outside, we do have physical models of the options as well that we can place into a larger context model. We can take a look at that if it's easier to see in 3 dimensions. And then just make sure that we hand the cards to, I don't know, probably Jenna or myself, before you leave, if you choose the physical cards, and we'll hand those out. We'll roll into questions now, is great. Yep. We'll start there and we'll go front.
I have a question about the, right now, high schools, say it's 4 stories, which are 3 stories, I mean, age is still, it's 5.
Right.
Everything else is just 3. So when you say it's 5 stories or 6 stories, so kids who like arrive to high school and have to climb up 4, 5, 6 flights of steps.
So the entrance into, so sorry, the question is in terms of the height of the building and pointing out the fact that this existing building is primarily 3 levels. The 4th level is really where the batting cages are up high, but the same way that we were trying to be honest with the number of levels in a 6-story building, even though we have a tiny little level at the base. We're calling it a 6-story building. So realistically, this is a 4-story building, even though students are really only traversing 3 stories. That's sort of the story behind the height of the building. The other part of the question was, what do students experience when they get to the building? Do they have to rise up 4 or 5 flights of stairs when they actually come in the front door? They wouldn't be doing that many stairs coming in. It would potentially be 1 or 2 flights that they would be coming up to get to like the primary area of the school environment. And then you would have the rest of the building, maybe it's a 3-story or a 4-story building up from there. So yes, there would have to be some rising up as you might come into the building and go up to it, but it wouldn't be quite as extreme as having to go up 5 or 6 sets of stairs in the morning. Okay. We'll go back there and then we'll come back there, just because he had asked before. Sorry. Okay.
So what is about sort of base case on? But changes. So, what is that? What an issue of project? It impacts the project that there is some cost reduction because we look at this meeting. Just asking for that. Those 2 things that exactly the cost. No rental of project but more. Same thing for the parking. So originally, as I said, price I wanted to do is so probably quite expensive. A base case of that is about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, I'm gonna try to repeat those questions. And you're taxing my memory, so I'm gonna try to go all the way back. No, it's fine. It's my issue. The question about the removal of the modulars and the cost impact on the project. And so it was stated that when we take the modulars away, there is a cost reduction because we don't have to pay for them. And that is a true statement. That reality was accounted for in the updated numbers that you see here. And it's really more impactful than just taking away the modulars, because the modular construction is not reimbursable at all. Also from the MSBA, it's a categorically ineligible element. So it means that cost that would be coming fully to Medford is no longer has to be incurred. The other piece about the modulars, though, is that when we take them away, we basically have to introduce phasing or extend phasing from what we previously had. So the additional time that is required, and sort of when the construction manager would have their staff on site for an additional year or 2 in some cases, that is also accounted for in these numbers in terms of the extended schedule that's associated by removing. And then the second part of the question was to deal with the field above the parking and the costs that are associated there. So yes, the costs that were added, and I'm not going to try to get all the way to the front of the costs or the slides again. Those costs were sort of all in terms of accounting for, both schedule, as well as the construction reality of building a garage structure and then the field itself over the top of it.
Right, and so the numbers here reflect, in this case, it's not.
Correct, yes, yes. So these numbers again reflect, surface parking and surface fields. And it will be less in the field inventory, than what we would get if we put it above.
I think earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that there were some non-program alternates that are non-included costs. I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about what those are.
Mhm.
And are they broken out as alternates because MSBA doesn't support them? Just kind of wondering.
So it's just the general note that's here at the bottom, right? This is the one that I was alluding to. Yes. And so the question was about the non-program related cost alternates, that are not wrapped into this cost overall. And the question was whether or not, or why we did not include those in the overall costing, whether they were not included as part of the MSBA or reimbursable by the MSBA. I will say that they are reimbursable generally by the MSBA as part of the overall construction cost, because when it comes to the particular mechanical system, that we choose, for instance, they don't dictate it. They give us a flat reimbursement based on the square footage cost, and it caps out at a certain number that is not gonna represent the overall construction cost. So it means that they don't have a particular stance on the mechanical system overall. So really what we did is we put those in as cost alternates just to give the community moving forward and the SBC moving forward some different levers to adjust cost moving forward. It's not impacted by program. And something that we can investigate as we get into the beginning of schematic design, and really just gives us the ability to adjust the number overall. There's some of those cost alternates that are non-program related are add alternates, and some of them are also deduct alternates, so we can do the building slightly less expensive if we make certain decisions.
Sounds like you know things on maturity and so different variations in the building systems.
So yeah, so for the mechanical systems, for instance, the base building assumption is a complete geothermal system, 100% of the building, ground source heat pumps. The two alternates that we have, one is a modified hybrid system that has 50% of the building on the ground source heat pumps, and then 50% of the building on an air to water source heat pump, which is not quite as efficient as the ground, but it's better than doing something all air source. And then we also have an all air source alternate, which is basically a variable refrigerant type system where we have little condensing units that are on the roof. To me, they always look like the little condensing units that are outside people's houses for their conditioning. But it's an air to air sort of base system. So that's one example of it. Yep.
So if I understand, by the time you got the creating schematic design, you would not have those alternates you would now
Correct. Yeah, and I think we're targeting pretty much that same like October timeline to make those decisions. That's when we're going to be trying to make the decision on the program alternates as well. And so that will really bring all the building and the design into clarity so that we could advance and then complete the schematic design phase.
If I can add, I think having it working out that way, it allows you to compare apples to apples at this stage, and then it would be easier when we do a single selected option to really compare those other alternates instead of everything very complex at this stage.
Here are standard range. So it's, I think it's hard to see the numbers without understanding correctly. Clearly, like, you can't say what exactly here, but is there some like from that?
Yeah, actually, I'll just jump in. On Monday night, the building committee heard a presentation, largely from, the mayor and her team, from a finance perspective. The very first slide of that presentation was provided by this team, where they went through and did for each of these options, what is likely to be a reimbursement, conservatively based. And those numbers are available in that presentation. So that would be the place to look to say, will this cost Medford versus like, what is this total number? And it's imperfect because we don't know with certainty exactly what MSBA is gonna pay for. We don't know exactly what our reimbursement rate will be. We don't know what percentage points we'll get. So it is a conservative point of view. But that is the first time anybody really has seen a slide that says like, what is the difference between these numbers and one that would pay. So I would definitely look for that slide. It is listed on the website.
That's great. Just to follow up. I think you're really good. So why don't you go and diet and explain?
But we might just be seeing. Yeah, I think it would be really helpful that, the information that you. Agree.
I think. Well, in the back of it.
So I see what the process is today and see. Although they are, there was a this one. You went to all of them. So why would we want them? Maybe to 1.2.
Sure. So again, the question for folks online is what is driving both the similarities in the cost between, say, C2.2A and C34A, as well as the lower cost in D1.1. And there was a statement made, well, aren't all the square footages the same? And they are the same within the options. So the addition renovation options have a certain square footage. The new construction option has a different square footage, which is about 30,000 square feet less. And that's specifically because if we're building new construction, we cannot build as large of a gymnasium as is currently here. We have about a 30,000 square foot gym, the maximum that the MSBA will allow us to build, not just reimburse for, but build in the new project is 18,000 square feet. So that's 12,000 square feet of the difference. A lot of the rest of it is wrapped up in those larger alternative PE spaces as well. And so that's a big reason in terms of the square footage being different between C22A and C34A and even B12 and D1.1, which has a smaller square footage. And so that's driving a lot of the reason why it is less expensive. There's also less involvement with the earthwork around it. It's simpler to build from a sort of horizontal plane of the parking lot ish. Up vertically versus any of the like the C22A and C34A have some amount of the building that pushes north into the hill that leads up to Edgerly. So there's some amount of additional earthwork and rock removal that's going to be involved with that. So that drives a little bit of the premium there. The timetable is about the same actually between C22A and C34A and D11. So that's not a big driver. I think it's probably primarily in the square footage, as well as like the earthwork and sort of the site constraints that are moving around it. That makes sense.
We read it. You're saying that 12,000 square foot west of
It's the combination of also, we have 30,000 square feet that the new construction is smaller than the existing. So generally $1,000 a square foot, right? So that's $30 million of the issue. And then there's going to be the rest of it's going to be from the site work and some of the other considerations that are specific to each of the options. The estimators did run out with the full set of plans that we have here, as well as the site plans and the detailed takeoffs. So that's where the numbers arose to. We can certainly dig into a little bit more and try to figure out exactly where it is, but that's the general rationale of those two parts and pieces. Smaller square footage and more involved site work.
So I think we're going to ask this before, but when we see these values, are they $6?
No.
Where extra money is factored in.
Right, so the question was in terms of whether these are fiscal year $26 or whether these are escalated out. All these numbers are escalated out to the beginning of construction. I believe it's 2028 in terms of the timing as it goes through, and there's a certain assumption based on just industry estimating norms in terms of what we account for on an annual basis. It's probably around 4% in terms of escalation.
So $28. 4%, that, here's $28 and 4% escalation. So completion. That's what it is. But that's what I thought.
So when the bids are given, from the, or it's not bids necessarily the construction manager, but when the guaranteed maximum price is developed, it will be developed based on what things would be, what estimators and the bidders are looking at for the $2028. So it's compounded interest, between, not compounded escalation between now and 2028 where it starts. Exactly what they may factor some of their additional escalation in as part of the bids, whether or not it won't go all the way to the end of construction. But they may factor it in sort of to the midpoint. That's where they go.
Question for the, so, you all do more than just school, right? You all do like labs and all this other stuff, right? Sit around that.
Our company does, I've only done.
Fair enough. Okay, yeah. So, but you have, maybe you all have, access to your colleagues to talk about possibilities over time. Is it a true statement to say that costs for building projects in Massachusetts since the pandemic high have come down? Or, you know, like there's been fewer construction projects and therefore maybe there's a little more hunger out there. And so I'm trying to get at why, Jenny said earlier, you know, we don't know why costs are just.
She said, I don't know, because I'm in construction.
Right, so there we go. So perfect. You don't have to answer it. You know, I would think that the OPM as the project manager, who, you know, we trust with all the dollars, and I'm assuming they all do the estimates.
We hire an estimating firm. So the estimates happen at various stages throughout the process, and we have SMA hires an estimator who and we hire an estimator. And those two estimators work very heavily on school projects, especially in Massachusetts. So their costs, in my experience, have been very accurate, I would say, those, especially those two particular firms. And then once we do bring on the construction manager, in schematic design, they will also, they will provide a cost estimate. Usually it's in lieu of, the OPM's cost estimate. But they are builders and they build, it's very likely that it will be a firm that has built many schools in Massachusetts. And they're looking at live bids that are coming in on their end. So that's sort of how the information comes in about the estimates. I will say to your first question about, you know, how prices and costs have been going up. There was, as you mentioned, you know, there's a spike during the pandemic, and that was inflation at that point was very high. I think there's, you know, costs haven't come down, but things have escalated slower and evened off. I think right now they're right now that we are seeing bids that are coming in lower than estimates that have been estimating this process, you know, projects through the past few years. But those estimates, the original estimates were kind of in you know, estimating for the increase that was expected, unknown. So it's not necessarily that the costs are coming down, it's that they are, you know, starting to level off, and better than the very conservative estimates that have been happening because of the program. So.
Yeah, no, and just a teeny quick follow-up. So are we really in a rush to make, like, get in the ground? Or we are in the ground? Well, I know some parents are, because they want their kid to, you know, come to school.
Well, the wonder if kids do those vaccines, then they're not suffocating. I mean, this building right now is not in great condition for kids sitting in classroom.
Honestly, I'm sorry now. Okay, yeah, that's, so we wanna, I mean, it's, I don't, yeah, I don't have eyes in the back of my head, so it's hard, I can't see all the
Safe
spheres.
so far.
But I'm surviving and maybe this is safe space, so.
As it relates to cost, though, there still is, every, as Jenny said, every day that we wait, there is still escalation that's happening. It's not, their costs aren't coming down. Things are still going to escalate as they would. And right now it is not that 4%.
As a percentage of this
that we are.
massive project.
Right, and that's
Yeah,
why
that
it's
is-
such a big number when you're escalating to start with, because of where we are in the market right now. That is why it's such an important, we'll wait a year and be adding $24+ billion.
I mean, the right time to do this project was 10 years ago. The next best time is when Right, so I think that's the hard part. If you look at projects, people like to talk about Somerville, they like to talk about Arlington, they like to talk about Winchester, all of those projects. Brockton is a more expensive project than this. If you look at those projects, you can't even equate them because the construction costs don't match at all. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to wrap their head around. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. But in terms of like where we are, even Lexington's like their prices are all locked in at this point. They know exactly what the project will cost. We're still like in estimating, right? So we're gonna be a year and a half to 2 years out from wherever they locked. So yeah, it is a really tough balance, but we're trying to move quickly so that I think most importantly, this building is failing. And we will have to keep it operational until there's something new. And so I don't want to spend money to do that and spend money on a new building, right? But we have to, like we actively are having to do things to keep the building, to provide cooling. We have a hot day protocol because of this building, but there's a lot of really rough stuff happening here. That is like not without its own sort of stuff.
I'm all in favor of a new building. I don't wanna deny any child or staff or teachers
I know.
a better space,
Yeah.
I've got, my family in public education, so. So I guess the question of rushing was June 10th, I'm gonna go quickly, we're gonna set in on one of those options. And how flexible are those options after June 10th? Can we start with D and somehow migrate up to C by?
Can't do that. That's just like the thing we cannot do. Right?
It feels like it's so fast and, boy, these are just still big numbers to have to deal with.
I guess if I could just like jump in, the community is saturated with choice, right? We rolled out 29 options and the overwhelming feedback was like, I can't even actually figure out what I like or don't like because there's 29 choices, right? And even at this, you look at these numbers and you're like, C 2.2, C 3.4, kind of look the same. The prices are kind of the same, like until you really are going to be able to get into a single option and really talk about, was this space stay or go, right? Is it geothermal or is it air source? Is there solar panels? Are there fields? Like you can't do that across 6, 7 choices without just people not being able to sort of stay with us, right? So all of that real like detailed selection and refinement, I don't think it's fair to ask the community to come through that process with us times 7. Like, and I think it's daunting to try to manage it all and message it. It'll be that daunting even when we have just one. So I know June 10th sounds fast. I just want to say this is like the 2.5 year mark on this project. So this is not that, like, this has been sort of a lifetime actually for the people who have been like working on all of these things to bring folks on, et cetera. And I think, to me, the decisions we're making, right? Like, I think there's like kind of 3 decisions. Is it new construction, yes or no, right? Are we keeping everything we possibly can, yes or no? Or are we gonna do something kind of, to me, that's what we're gonna decide on June 10th. And from there, there's all kinds of options to sort of like tweak and adjust and talk about like, Does the auditorium become 500 seats or 800 seats or 1,000 seats? Like all of those things get a little bit easier when you're not like, well, what does that mean for this one versus this one versus this? So I do think like it's overwhelming to people and we're hearing that in the meeting. So trying to like sort of narrow the focus and think would be actually helpful.
Yes, question up front. Yes.
So I believe there were the life cycle cost analysis that will be developed for each option of it. Those were completed.
They were presented at so the question for folks online is the life cycle cost analyses. They were presented at the end of the building committee meeting on Monday, which we know was a tough time to sort of get to that information because it was a long meeting that we ran through, but the recording of that is available. So you now have the ability to just fast forward to that part. But there is both the body and operational carbon analysis as well as the life cycle cost analysis that was studied at a very high level for two of the options at either in the extremes. So it was looked at for D1.2 because that's the most renovation that we have in D1.1, which is all new construction. At this point, we're not trying to pinpoint exactly what sort of carbon emissions might be for any one of the options. We just want to understand sort of relative to one another, where is there differences and is there a rationale or logic to picking one option based on either lower operational costs or sort of lower carbon, so whatever the metric is that we're choosing for our.
And maybe it's an oversimplification, but it just seems like, you know, without those, the answer is the 1.1. That's the lowest.
Well, that's the answer if you aren't committed to maintaining the gym space and you're not committed to the pool. And I think we've like heard really clearly that those are priorities. So D1.1. No, it does not. That's the problem. I think that's the holdback that people have with the D option is you could have a pool, but it would be a separate debt exclusion that makes people very nervous. And you cannot have gym space like we have, and you would lose the batting cages, the fitness room, the gymnastics room. And there's something I'm missing. The weight room. Yeah, okay. Okay. So all of those spaces are things that exist in the building today that would not be possible in that. So those are the trade-offs that are like sort of beyond just the cost profile that we have to work through.
So my question. So this one, like, I can't speak to the cost. Cost estimated. Cost. Very good. School of the cost and the difference. There is one. That's all. Expression. That's all 85 days. So it's figure out
I guess it was just it seemed like it was percentage. It's not exponential, it's not exponential, but it sounds like it. Oh, right, okay, yeah.
I just want to mention, maybe you guys can connect with
Yeah,
the
that was
lobby.
great.
The lobby. They can't hear what's going on here online at all. So I just want to be fair to the people who are online trying to follow with technology that's like a little bit rudimentary. So we haven't heard from Tony. I'm gonna ask Tony to go first.
Talk a little bit about the issues, financially and non-financially, between preschool and because I think, you know, for some people, they look just now and say, hey, just do high school, teach out. Well, what are the limitations? We actually do this. Obviously, those programs that we have, we're still gonna try to exist in this. At present, I gotta end up paying for it, that's what.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So online, the question was, if we do high school only, what happens to those programs and is there a cost associated with that decision? The answer is yes, there's absolutely a cost associated with a decision like that. So the costs associated are a little bit different based on the program and a little bit different based on the question of where we put them. So if if you have any understanding of our portfolio of buildings, what you know here in Medford is there's like two buildings that would be sort of in play. One is the Hegner Center, which is in a many years long process of being rehabbed and renovated for Medford Rec. So we would maybe go there, but then Medford Rec would not go there. And then the other building that would become available at the end of this project is the Curtis Tufts. So one of the things that will happen over the course of this summer is an evaluation of the Curtis Tufts, because we can't just put new programming there. There's massive renovations that would need to happen there is my understanding, but really having to quantify what does that look like? And is there space for the things that we're saying we might move is part of the conversation. So, the answer is the numbers here, when you look at the high school only numbers, what those can't tell you yet is what else would it cost for us to make this choice, right? Is that another building? Do we have to buy something? Are we gonna rent things and have that be on the operating budget? There are costs associated with like the relocation of those programs that are not known yet, but that is some of the work that is coming between now and October. So that when we say, should the MFM be here? We can also say, if it's not here, where could it go? And what would that look like, either in another capital project, separate debt exclusion or whatever, or we're gonna rent a space for them and it would cost this much money, and that means we have to come up with that much money on an annual basis. So that's the calculation yet to come on displacing programs out of the high school. So these numbers don't reflect that and won't. Those numbers are knowable, and that's work is in process. Sure.
Comment on the expression. I think it would be really helpful to everyone still all what are the existing programs and what are the old programs that we are working.
We will update the slides to be really explicit about what we mean when we say all programs.
Right.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
We can do that. Do I see another? And are there questions online, Will?
There are, Jenny.
Okay. Thank you, everyone online, for being so patient.
So there's a question kind of about modular classroom, the project. Can you just talk about an experience that you've had building a project where there's kind of been that phasing process going on and how that may have affected education delivery?
Sure. So, I mean, adjacent to us in Somerville, at Somerville High School, there were even more land poor, I would say, in terms of the high school project where it was built. Modular classrooms, there was one bank of modular classrooms that I think were about 12 that were on site. And we used that as sort of a shell game location to move teachers and students out into the modular classrooms and then back into areas of the completed building. The timeline got a little bit complicated there because COVID hit right in the middle of the project. But the modular classrooms were certainly used for multiple phases as part of the construction as it went through. And there, in terms of impact on education, teachers and students, well, primarily students because they were moving out there, and teachers were out there or they were not. But teachers were moving, or students were moving outside from the existing building to the modular classroom building, sometimes moving around a construction site to get over to another portion of the existing building, a new building, and back in. So there was exposure to weather. There was a little bit of additional time to get outside to move through. But the modular classroom building was placed in pretty close proximity to the existing building. So we try to minimize that and again, make sure that sort of that safety concern is always present. I believe that staff were required to be outside during class changes just to make sure that students weren't walking off in different directions as opposed to going to different classes. So that was part of the consideration as well.
And then we've got another question, specifically about option D. Can you just talk about again the impact on athletic facilities and why they'd be smaller in D as opposed to maybe the C options relative to like the
gym and
the gym, yeah, things like that?
Sure, yeah, so the reason that the D option, the athletic facilities, the gymnasium, as well as the alternative PE spaces like a gymnastics gym or a fitness room would be smaller is because when we have the larger spaces, we're allowed to renovate them through the MSBA program. It's just part of the reality of if you're in a building with those larger spaces. As part of new construction, they cap the size of the gymnasium that we can build as new. It's not a scenario where, well, we can build larger if Medford is willing to spend their own money to build something larger. There's actually a hard cap that says if you go over 18,000 square foot on a new construction gymnasium, the MSBA will not participate in your project at all. So it is a hard cap on that. And so that's part of the reason why that particular facility would be smaller. And then for the fitness room and gymnastics gym, if we are building those new versus renovating them, it's a much more challenging thing to get those accepted as the larger spaces. Some of that would have to be sort of understood in negotiation discussions back and forth during subsequent submissions of reports to the MSBA. But in a lot of cases, those end up needing to be smaller as well.
Arrow has her hand raised, so I will ask her to unmute. There, you should be good to go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for all this information. It's a lot. My question was actually the one he just asked about the modular questions, and my question was actually the opposite. I sort of am excited to see less modular classrooms, but I'm curious what the project team's experience is with learning in schools that you've seen go through construction in a phase construction where you're in a classroom next to a phase of construction that's happening sort of immediately adjacent to you. And is that better? That's sort of the question. How has that gone?
I don't know if I would use the term better necessarily. It's a reality of the process that we go through, right? And the things that we have to account for are air quality. And there is continuous air quality monitoring that is done by the construction manager and or a third-party testing agency during the course of construction to make sure that wherever dust management sort of barriers are set up, that they are doing their job and that there's nothing that's permeating through that into the rest of the school that's occupied. Acoustics is another one that is we pay a lot of attention to in terms of making sure that whatever temporary partitions we might be building, if we are separating occupied space from space that's under construction, that it's designed with acoustics in mind. We don't just put up a single layer of drywall or plywood and expect that that's going to be able to control everything. It's not to say that we can completely isolate the occupied sections from construction, but we need to manage it from an acoustic perspective. And then we potentially need to work around different days, like MCAS testing days, for instance, are usually quiet days when certain construction activities are going to be limited. So there's challenges all the way through it, but they're manageable. It has to be a clear line of communication between the construction team as well as the district and the school to make sure that operations are smooth.
If I could add to that, I think that is one of the benefits of bringing a construction manager on during this bad design phase so that they can work directly with the district and the school even before a project approval happens to kind of talk through some of those issues and concerns that would happen on a project that is happening inside an occupied building. And to Matt's point, there will be very clear, very constant communication between a construction manager and the school at all times, and everyone will, schedule be very clear what's happening where inside the building. And to Matt's point about MCAS, that's the communication piece is key, and bringing a construction manager on early really allows that communication to happen.
And Kara, one other thing that I would say as we talk about the modular versus construction experience, our school has 50% of its students in vocational programming. Not all of those vocational programs have like highly specialized space. Some are quite simple and look like a classroom, but many of those programs operate in highly specialized spaces that are not going to be able to be like moved into a modular, right? We can't teach our electrical students in a modular. And so if we are in a situation where we make selections around modular, there's another layer of complexity there that we'll have to contend with, which is, are there opportunities to move those programs to nearby businesses, off-site somewhere? And then what does that do that will disrupt learning, especially in a school that's working really hard to integrate schedules and make our vocational programming accessible, and traditional, advanced programming on the academic side, accessible to the vocational students as well. So when we talk about a modular situation, for us, it's that much more complicated because our vocational programs are not all such that a modular is even a possibility. So that is a real consideration for us as we get to a single selection. And then we start talking about all the contingency planning that needs to happen. That's just like another layer of complexity for this project.
No, I absolutely appreciate that. My question is coming from, and I pointed this out in the text in the chat, but both of my kids will likely attend the school during construction. And I'm just thinking about like learning calculus with steel being erected next to me, right? It's a reality. I get it. It has to happen, but I think it's helping me decide between a alteration, renovation, and a new construction option, right? It's like, does the new construction pull those activities apart so that those 80 months of construction are better for the students that are in the school for those 80 months? And then just one more comment since I got unmuted. The other thing I pointed out in the chat is I think I would encourage the building committee to ask for a very simple massing rendering of the building options from Winthrop Street. I think we all acknowledge and know that getting this project passed through is going to require significant community buy-in. And I think that there's just an opportunity here for something that, how it's going to impact Winthrop Street, what it's going to look like, how it's going to feel, and just what that might mean when we're thinking about going between the D1 and any of the other options that maintain at grade facilities at the front of the site. I know D is taller, and I know D is closer to the road right above the street. So I think I would advocate for the building committee to ask for that in the next week. It's probably something that can be done pretty quickly by super talented 3D modeling teams. But I think it's really important to think about when we're thinking about people who aren't going to have kids in this school and how this impacts them.
Yeah, I don't think we have to wait for the building committee because you just made the ask, Kara. So
Yeah,
the team heard you.
yeah, I think that's something that we can share with the building committee.
Yeah,
Either
be great.
before or at the June 10th meeting, so it's just part of the visual that's wrapped in here.
Great. I had a question that is maybe best answered by Dr. Galusi. That a resident sent to me and asked that we answer. So there are some questions around sort of the need and the intended usage of particular spaces. So for example, one of them is some of the variants we're considering from the auditorium. So for those of you who are following the auditorium, we have options right now for 750, 500, 800, and 1,000 seats. So can you talk a little bit about like where we started and how these options came to be and the vision for that space?
Absolutely, absolutely, so people at home can hear. Where to start? So right now, I think it's important to know currently our auditorium holds, I would say roughly 330 seats. However, many of them are broken. So in reality, it's more closer to probably 300 seats. And there are about 1,200 students in this building. So not only do we have a very thriving arts program and theater program growing every year, but we also, right now, the principal has very limited space in which to gather grade levels of students. So in order to have a school assembly or grade level assemblies, anything instructional, speaker series, it's really just the gymnasium. And for some events that might be appropriate,
But if we're talking about speaker series or having any sort of projection opportunities, it gets very cumbersome and challenging. That, just so you understand, like, part of the need and the want. So one of the things we did with the project team is the principal, myself, the director of arts. We also had a meeting with some theater experts. We also have one on our building committee. Mr. Malone joined that meeting, and we did have a conversation. I learned a lot about theaters in that conversation because it involved the total space. And I will say that I was someone that very much was advocating for the 1,000-seat space, thinking that we have a school that's about 1,200. And I would say I came out of that conversation with some of the people talking about performance and intimate spaces and how voice projects, how sound projects, and just the overall experience when you're in that space. There was also a lot of suggestion to make the seat spaces smaller so that the performance space is a little bit different. Knowing also additionally that the 1,000 seats aren't going to be able to fit the entire school community. And maybe the goal is fitting half of the school community so that you have some flexibility, but you're also keeping that space. So it was important for us to see what the estimates would be for multiple iterations of spaces. MSBA, I believe, covers
Up to 750.
up to 750, which is why we have a range from 500 to 750 that you come to 1,000. Does that cover it?
That's number one.
Okay.
Number two is the community meeting space, so I will happily take that one. So the community meeting space, one of the things that was envisioned as we talked about that space was like, there's like 4 meetings going on tonight across the city in various capacities. And I think there is a real desire from lots of residents who want to be able to come to meetings in person, and they want, when they're in person, to be able to hear and see, which you're all struggling through right now, as you know. But they also want, if they want to watch from home, they want to be able to hear and see. And we have one space in the entire city that can handle that kind of meeting, in addition to really 2 spaces in the entire city that are set up for like gatherings. We have the Bonsignor room and the library, and then we have the chamber. And so the concept of the community like meeting space was to create another space in the city for use by the community for all of the various reasons why meetings happen, whether it's bringing in a speaker for AI and with your, handling like the advent of AI with your children, with your 5-year-olds, or having a public meeting or having a public hearing. And so what we did was try to say, if we are going to have a space like that, how do we do that in compliance with the rules and requirements and laws around having public meetings and having open space for meetings and enough capacity. So that is sort of the genesis of the community meeting were those public meetings. At the same time, I had a chance to go to Malden High School, where they have a community meeting room of sorts, and for an award ceremony. And one of the things that was so interesting about that space is we were there for an award ceremony at like 9 o'clock in the morning. Public could get into and out of that space without interrupting school operations whatsoever. There was an outside entrance, there was a way to get in, there was a way to have the meeting completely closed off of the school. The entire school was continuing to operate as it was. This space is like sort of a big rectangular room, like I might not pick a rectangle, but it was a big rectangular room, and it clearly gets a lot of use. And so when we were talking about what goes in the space summary, this was really a chance for us in a global way to explore all things that are possible, right? And so the community meeting room was one of those spaces that was like requested and envisioned. And I have heard from countless residents that we lack that kind of space in Medford. Now, are we going to go build that space somewhere else, like in a standalone fashion? Probably not, maybe never. And so if we're talking about having an opportunity to do that here inside the confines of this project in some way, it's worth exploring. And so that is a thing that we are exploring now. The next one is the wellness.
Welcome Center, AKA registration, AKA Parent Information Center. It has lots of names. But as you know, when you enter the lobby here at Medford High School, that is our registration office. We like to refer to it as a welcome center. So that's why to think how we want families to feel when they come here. So much so, we've created a little hub around our welcome center so that when families come in, they can have all of their questions answered. They have adjacent supports as needed. For example, behind this wall is our EL department. Many of our students that come to Medford registered here also require some additional supports. They may require some language testing so that we can determine the appropriate supports for those students in schools, the appropriate assignments. We also have special education located right next to our welcome center. We have nursing. As you know, medical needs are part of the registration process. We have transportation right here, and we have MFN also right here. So all around our welcome center for families to come here are all of the adjacencies that are needed to support families to get their questions answered, to help with any sort of assessments, assignments, and just wraparound services.
Okay, and the Welcome Center is housed here today, so.
Yes.
There was, and if we go all the way back to the beginning, which was like in 2022, really, when we submitted our first statement of interest for this iteration of our statement of interest that was ultimately successful, we always endeavored to rehome all of the programming that was in this building. So that was part of our statement of interest. It talked about the Welcome Center, it talked about the MFN, it talked about central office, it talked about all of those spaces. So it was always the school committee's intention and plan to continue to house those spaces. So the plan always has been that they would be here because they've always been here. Now, is that the right reason to have them here? Maybe not. And what we are doing now when we start talking about a high school only option is saying, well, what if they work somewhere else? Does that improve the quality of programming? Does it improve accessibility? Does it save costs? Like there's a lot of things to explore there, but over the course of 3 full school committees now, the school committee has been steadfast in the value of these programs and the things that are happening in this building. The pre-K programming was always here for many, many years and was moved out. And there's a great debate for us to have at some point in time about whether centralized or decentralized programming is beneficial for pre-K students. And we'll have that debate at some point in the near future. But the school committee, as the holder of the sort of application process and the council through its affirmation, has always said that these programs are important to Medford. I think you all probably are seeing and hearing about the Medford Family Networks, loss of a grant and the way that throws that program into question. Nobody in Medford wants to see the Medford Family Network go away. It provides critical resources, and more importantly, it has huge potential to continue to provide services that are a little bit different than they are today to reach more families here in Medford as Medford's families change over the course of time. So all of those things have always been part of the plan, simply put, and really the cost is causing us to say, is it the best plan? And so stepping back and evaluating, is this the best plan or is there another better plan is what will happen as we go forward with some of that program.
Can I just say one small thing too about Kids Corner? It's our municipal daycare. It serves our teachers. It serves anyone that works within the city of Medford. It does also serve some community families for space when there's open enrollment, and it also serves our students. So if we have students that require daycare so that they can finish their high school education and graduate, we also provide that here for our students. And I would say one of the things, it's a very tight space right now, and there are wait lists. And so from community members especially. And so this would also offer an opportunity to enlarge that opportunity, daycare opportunity within the city for a lot of our families.
The next item was Teen Health Center. You like me to do that one?
No, I can try and then you can add on. I will admit that I'm not as well versed about the teen health center as any of all of the other spaces in the school, but the teen health center would serve between both the office of our nursing and as well as the office of our behavioral health and school counseling programs. So that this would provide just satellite space for medical or social workers, mental health workers to have a space here to be working and supporting and serving some of our students based on whatever their needs are. This would need to be adjacent to the nursing program for confidentiality and to kind of acquire space, but it would be that there is a separate dedicated office and room used for outside consultants. We do currently have that with Cambridge Health and some other consultants. We do have Dr. Savia, who is our district pediatrician, and so we make do with what we can, but this space also comes here and sometimes provides some medical care for our students, especially around sports and athletics, in providing physicals for students that may not have that immediate access within the home.
And then I will say part of the conversation in the very beginning of the Teen Health Center with Dr. Sabia and Director Silva was that to create capacity to have a space where like a Cambridge Health Alliance could co-locate here would improve access to healthcare for students who are lacking that access, right? And those programs, they are all quite different, but Cambridge Health Alliance would operate like sort of independently of our school, but also within our school, right? And there's a lot of grant funding that comes with those programs to open teen health centers in high schools. So that was the genesis again to explore, which was to say, like, we can never do that if there is no space for it, but if there is a space for it, could we create a collaborative partnership with a reputable provider in the community and provide access to care for our students here in this building? So beyond what Dr. Sabia is able to do sort of in his, like, in the limited time he has to come here, like really to have standing healthcare, like Malden High does have a teen health center. There's several big schools that do provide that. So that was the genesis of saying we should look at this and decide if that is something we want to go forward with. But the first thing is there has to be space for that.
Yes, and full transparency, the grant requires that. So the grant funding that Jenny mentioned requires separate space, not a shared space.
And then the last piece is additional fields.
Is this for the fields above?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm just gonna be honest, not like swaying anyone, but I am one of those people that would love to see if ever we could do it. The track and football fields here. I say that for a couple of reasons, purely around equity. I know that the high school, Medford High School, is not situated in the center of Medford. So the location of Medford High School can be challenging for some of our families, and I have to just acknowledge that. However, this is the space and the land that we have to use for this project. And so right now, currently, we have sports programs and we have our band. Our band practices in the parking lot, right out front. And if they're lucky enough, they can get to go and practice at Hormel, which is really where they're performing. So I personally would love to see that here, if ever at all possible. And because of that, I wouldn't want to see a space like Everly Fields be eliminated. So I would love to be able to prioritize as much field space as possible. And I think the way to probably do that, I know can't always have everything, but a way to do that is to have the field on top of the parking garage part of this process. Lots of teams of people on the school building committee, our staff, our teachers, our administrators. We've done lots of school tours. And we were able to see this in action at Waltham High School, which was recently done 2023. They have a field on top of a parking garage, and it's their soccer field. And it was fascinating to be able to see. I would tell you, I have mixed feelings about a parking garage, but maintaining as much space as we can for our student and community use is definitely a priority.
Yeah, and I'll just tack on to that. We are at like a premium for field space in Medford, right? Again, we don't have endless amounts of space that we can sort of open up and make a new field. So if you have kids involved in athletics, you know that, right? Kids are sort of all over, particularly the high school kids, they're sort of all over the place trying to get to their fields. There are kids who leave here with their football gear and have to get to Carmel, which is why they practice on this sort of like makeshift fields here. And then you have kids that run track that have to get across town. So there is an equity issue. On top of that, there's just a lack of space, right, in Medford for all these kinds of things, and there's huge demand. And I think I've seen the demand grow. Like Lucas plays soccer. The fields are always just like sort of wall to wall, busy during soccer season. The softball fields, the baseball fields, they're all like that, right? So the other sort of value of thinking about bringing the stadium here, a football stadium and track here, is if you could co-locate that, that creates a campus feel, right? For football games, et cetera. You're at your school, you're on the field, you're at your school, you're behaving like you're at your school. You're not in a place where you're like, this is not my school and I can behave how I want, right? So all of those things, bringing them here sort of creates that here. The other thing that could do for Medford is allow us to activate Carmel differently than it is today. Carmel is situated near affordable grocery stores, public transit, and multiple schools. There's an opportunity there for the city to explore, if they choose, to say, what could Carmel be if we co-locate our main stadium here, right? So there's like a bigger sort of planning and development vision there. I've been talking about that with folks on the council and the mayor for like well over a year now. Like first came up when the horse farm, like that sits like up adjacent here, went for sale, and I was like, we should buy that for this project, and it got scooped up, and now it's going to become, 12 houses. But like those kinds of opportunities to acquire space and to do the kinds of things that we're trying to do in Medford across the board and to activate spaces differently is like a tangential opportunity that's only made possible if we can like relocate that. Carmel also needs a tremendous amount of work as it on its own for its own project. And so the question then becomes like, is there an opportunity to really sort of zoom out and think about what's possible? So that's where field over parking sort of came from in along with the planning. There's an equity piece, there's an activation of Carmel piece, and then there is an additional like adding to our inventory opportunity. Chet, did you have a question?
I was trying to ask something. Facilities basketball facilities available in the Northwest basketball. With the teams from basketball court, it's actually protocol for practices, intensive families, and that's just, it's mostly boys this year, but with St. Joe's going out of business, that's where Saints basketball was for girls. So I fully expect it to expand girls basketball as well next week. Just sitting on that. Further pressure on number of basketball courts that are available in that and of course there's only one court. Right. That's it. It's not going to place another place in those facilities. I need to get changes. Then for deciding to go with the cheapest option,
also been about absolutely said.
So for those on the phone, the comment was really about emphasizing that our constraints extend to our indoor basketball facilities and our pool. And the sort of the increasing importance that the Medford High School campus plays, particularly in basketball and as the only like location of an indoor pool in the state.
Yes, just a real quick question about fields, since we have on topic, for the 80 months or so. Well, I really think a lot used as part of construction. Where else is for that time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one we don't have an answer to yet. But there's a lot of conversation already happening about what those possibilities are. And already, like, I know I've talked to folks at Tufts to say, like, hey, like, we might need some help over here on various capacities, right? So there, yeah, Hormel, I think, is one of those concerns. So if we have to like relocate, programming to Hormel, I think Hormel needs substantial work before it can really house that kind of activity. So all of that like contingency planning has yet to come, but the goal will be, yes, has to be. I was kicked out of my house and the locks will be changed if there's not a soccer field for Lucas to play on. They do. Lucas is like, just don't take my soccer field, like some of the theater kids would say the same thing, just leave my theater alone, right? And it's real, like what draws you here, it might be your robotics lab, it might be the theater, it might be, the gymnastics room, like it could be anything, but kids have to belong here. Whether it's in construction or not, right? So yeah, we'll work through all of that to make sure there are plans for all of those programs. Andrew?
Appreciate it. The stories about the programs, the extra programs, I hadn't heard any of those. Our family certainly benefited from the MFN, machine here. So thank you for reminding me. So to pivot to the architect, in terms of like C 2.2A, right? Versus the high school option, right? So you have the high school opening option, then you have that little extra wing on 2.2A. I'm gonna let you explain this concept, but have you all thought about shelling it out so that you get, you get a quarter shell of that in space, and then we just get to wait. We kind of wait to see how we can fit it in. Is it, in other words, is it all in or nothing? Do we have to go either high school or 2.28, or can we create this a foreign shell space? It's just basically it's an empty space. You've got all the services coming in, but they don't go anywhere, and there's no walls or anything. It's just open space that you can program in a couple of years. Yeah.
So the question online for folks is, have we considered in say C 2.2A or somewhere in between C.2A and C 2.2A, the high school only option of shelling out some space, basically building the exterior envelope and rough interior structural systems, and then coming back later to sort of finish out the inside in any number of ways. And I think that's a great example you asked earlier about sort of how can these options evolve as we go forward. We have not looked at that specific scenario, but that is something that we could look at as we go forward in terms of providing the outside. Probably there's going to still be a significant amount of cost when we look at sort of development of structural foundations and the exterior envelope, and whether it's like 75%, 25% of the cost, I don't know exactly. But it's probably not like a 50-50 type of split in terms of the investment, but it would allow for some additional discussion to happen down the road to understand sort of what would be going in there in terms of programming. So there may be some value for it, and then there's certainly something we could talk about over the coming months.
Any other questions online, Will? No. All right. Thank you everyone online who joined us. We will post a video of, we will post a recording and a video of this for those who might want to watch again, or tell their friends to watch. And then the folks who are in person are welcome to join us in the lobby. And please don't forget to weigh in and vote and tell us which option you prefer. Like, we really, really, really want to know that information so that the building committee can hear all your voices as they weigh these decisions.
And can we just note, I think there was a question or two earlier for people at home, that tomorrow morning, this slide presentation will be posted on the website. So if people want to be able to go back and refer before they complete their survey, it will be posted tomorrow morning, and then the survey is open until
The end of the day on Friday, this Friday, June
Fifth.
5th.
And so maybe we can send out a note to everybody as well, so that folks who weren't able to join us, but.
yes, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you everyone online.